I wanna feel love, passion, joy, and peace, sun and rain, flowers and trees, spirit, truth, doubt and fear, such a gift. I wanna feel love, passion, joy, and peace, sun and rain, flowers and trees, spirit, truth, doubt and fear, such a gift. I wanna feel. 'Cause I wanna feel like this. I wanna feel like this. I wanna feel like this. I wanna feel.
That's Mary Tebbs, ladies and gentlemen. Mary Tebbs. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So our theme this month is honoring the divine feminine in all. And my job today is to talk about the living legacy left to us by the New Thought leaders who came before us. Those leaders have not only embodied the consciousness of the divine feminine, expressing as creativity, nurturing, receptivity, intuition, empathy, wisdom, and so much more, but they did so in female bodies. Often in times and places where females were seen as second-class humans. I'm told by Kurt that 70% of CSL's ministers are female, and that is the highest female clergy rate of any of the world's religions or denominations. How's that for a legacy? The original plan from Home Office for this message was to talk about the earliest women in religious science. I have chosen instead to talk very briefly about the earliest women of New Thought, and primarily about our own center's living legacy, which in addition to countless female practitioners includes 8 female ministers, whose spiritual growth and decision to become ministers was fostered right here in our center. I'm wondering who of you will be next. Each of these 8 women began her studies here, became practitioners before going to ministerial school and being licensed or ordained as CSL ministers. I am pleased to have had the privilege of learning from and with each one of them. We are but following in the footsteps of the entire New Thought movement, which has an amazing legacy of female leaders, without whom this center probably would not exist. I was going to tell you more about them, but time today won't allow that. They include Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of the Christian Science Church, her student, Emma Curtis Hopkins, a teacher of teachers whose students included Melinda Kramer and Nora Brooks, who are the co-founders of Divine Science, Rick Smolitz, who was instrumental in the formation of the International New Thought Alliance, Myrtle Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, and our own non-female Ernest Holmes. The Fillmores and the Holmes were both all ordained as divine science ministers before they brought unity and religious science into being. So it all traces back to Mary Baker Eddy. There's a direct lineage. New Thought is intensely practical, since following the teaching allows us to actually change our lives as we change the thoughts to which we give energy. At the same time, it is supremely mystical, since knowing that we are one with God, with the creative power of the universe, is as profoundly mystical as it was when Jesus said, "My Father and I are one." And as Kurt told us last week, that doesn't mean God is male. So I reached out to all 8 of the female ministers who were fostered at our center, and I asked them to share a couple of paragraphs about how their time in our center nourished their growth, inspired them to become ministers, and led to the varied ministries they have gone on to pursue. I had hoped to read all of those to you, but some of them wrote far more than a couple of paragraphs. And we would be here for a very long time if I read you each word. I have compiled what they wrote into a document, and I have a sign-up sheet out in the lobby. So if you would like me to email it to you, the entirety of what these amazing women wrote, I would be happy to do that. There is a printed copy out there so you can see what it is. It's 8 pages long in tiny print. Okay, but I really encourage you to let me send that to you, because personally I found it so incredibly inspiring and interesting to read about each woman's journey and the shared love that they have for the Salt Lake Center and the role it played in leading them into ministry. And I think you'll all love it too. So as I share these stories this morning, I encourage you to reflect whether any of this is anything like your own journey. What about it is different, but maybe calls to you in a way you hadn't considered? And what inspires you to consider what your next calling might be? So we've got pictures. Our 8 amazing women are Reverend Jan Ewing, which Rob is going to put up there for us. See? That's Jan. Reverend Molly Cameron, Reverend Cece Coltrane, they're sisters. Reverend Barbara Novak, Reverend Nicole Murgis, Reverend Myrna Hurst, Reverend Claire Summerhill, and Reverend Lynn Hakester. I know many of you took classes from a number of those folks. So these 8 women all started their unique spiritual journey right here in our center. They took classes and ultimately did practitioner training before moving on to ministerial school. None of them walked in the doors here looking to become a minister, in case you're wondering. But as each one of them followed the promptings of Spirit, each in her own way was led into that path. Between them, they have started multiple CSL centers or teaching chapters. They've served as ministers in at least a dozen different churches, served in leadership and staff positions in our international and regional organizations, in addition to the service they provided right here in our own center. Their length of time of ministry has varied. Some have since retired, though in many ways, one never really retires from ministry. It just takes different forms. At this very moment, our Reverend Jan is back in the youth room working with the kids. 2 of these women are currently in the process of beginning new teaching chapters. Almost without exception, these women shared in what they wrote an experience that many of us have had. Someone told them about the center. See what can happen when you tell a friend about us? They came and they felt like they had found their spiritual home. They felt inspired and in some cases healed by what they heard on Sunday, and they wanted more. They started going to classes, though some waited years, usually leading them into practitioner study. Almost without exception, each one had no intention of becoming a practitioner when they started prac studies. They just wanted more classes. By the end of the second year of prac training, they all felt called to be a practitioner, and they all were blessed by that experience. Their call to ministry varied, some waiting years after becoming a practitioner to know that for them ministerial school was the next step, while others knew right away that full-time ministry was indeed their calling. And I wanted to say as an aside, because I know that some of you are probably baffled about my role here. because I am a reverend. But my path was very different from these women. All of these women already had other careers before coming to the center. 2, in fact, were attorneys, which I know because they helped me with my divorce. I actually entered college with the intention of going into ministry. I did a bachelor's and master's program in theology, and right after college, I went right into full-time ministry with a group called Young Life. I was ordained 45 years ago for a counseling ministry, which I did for 25 years before I moved to Utah and moved into healthcare chaplaincy. I made it very clear to Reverend Donald when I started practitioner training, actually before I started it, that I was not giving up my ordination and my other ministries to be a practitioner, nor was I going to pursue ordination with CSL, because pulpit ministry, this thing I'm doing today, is not my true calling. So now let me tell you about our center's living legacy and a part of what each of these women wrote for me to share with you. Please excuse me if I stumble. I tell you, it's much more difficult to read other people's words than words that I write myself. So I've read them a lot, but I have had a difficult time with this. So Reverend Jan was raised in a traditional New England family and came to Utah to ski. She was feeling called to the unknown, the unexplained world beyond what she knew and had been taught. She wanted to find out what was beyond the edges. Here in our center, she heard a call to think differently, heard messages of acceptance and hope, where faith was like a continual river of new learning instead of a passive acceptance of biblical words and stories. After a time as a practitioner, she felt called to learn and stretch her faith even more. As she pondered ministerial school, an older, wiser colleague asked her, "Isn't there anything else you could do? Anything to not become a minister?" But as she searched her heart, Jan's answer was, "No, not really." She returned to our center after graduation and served it in several positions, at various times teaching classes, serving as youth director, and as a staff minister, who in her words blathered heavenly truths from the pulpit. Through all of it, her underlying calling was to teach and pass along the wisdom that faith is never ending. Love is the message. There is no hell except what we create. And heaven, like hell, is not a place, but a state of mind, which we can always choose if we open our eyes and hearts to see and receive the glory, the beauty, the love that always surrounds us and lives through us. We can choose to be the best we can be, or we are free to make other choices. Reverend Cece arrived at the center parched and felt like the words she heard were like a refreshing drink of water. She cried every Sunday for her first month, hiding out in the back of the room. I know some of us have had that experience. With her first foundations class, something caught fire within her and continued through her practitioner training. At a Selamar between her first and second year of prac training, she heard a voice in her heart say, "Next is ministerial school," which baffled her since she wasn't even clear if she wanted to license as a practitioner. She is currently in her 15th year as the senior minister of the Greater Dayton, Ohio CSL Center. In addition, she's the main teacher for the Dayton CSL School of Spiritual Leadership, training new ministers, and she's the provost for the Holmes Institute. All of which keeps her incredibly busy, which she loves. Cece's calling is to raise people up to change the world. Her sister, Reverend Molly, also grew up in Utah and was an integral part of our center, serving in many capacities for several years, including as a practitioner before heading off to ministerial school. After graduation, she founded the Columbus, Ohio Center for Spiritual Living. and served as its senior minister for 11 years before retiring last summer. She left behind 4 staff ministers and 12 practitioners. In retirement, she is dreaming of what is yet to come and living with the philosophy that retirement is not the beginning of the end. It's just the end of the beginning. Reverend Barbara Novak began her spiritual discovery with massage school, where she connected with the energetic reality of life, which she found to be more essential to healing than the work of her hands. In her life coach training, she discovered her affinity for the invisible. These realizations led her, a recovering Catholic, to seek a new spiritual path, which brought her to our center. She marveled that she found meaning sitting here in church rather than being outside hiking or skiing. She took a few classes, eased into volunteering, and eventually started practitioner training. She found that what she was learning here enhanced her coaching and bodywork practice. She studied, volunteered, was on the board, and began TAing classes, which is assistant teaching. During her time here, she also led the visioning team and founded a Wednesday night Taizé service. In 2005, she answered the call and began her ministerial studies. While in school, she worked for Seaside CSL. After being licensed, she accepted a position as a staff minister and director of education at the Seattle CSL, which she did for 5 years before leaving to care for her mother full-time for the last 1.5 years of her life. After her mother's passing, Barbara entered Peruvian-based shamanic studies, which contained all her areas of focus: the mind, the body, emotions, and soul. Through her private practice, she companions her clients in living life most holistically while actively participating in the creative universe. She maintains both her massage license and her ministerial license with CSL, and she welcomes life's next adventure. Reverend Nicole discovered our center shortly after 9/11. Reverend Jan's Sunday messages resonated with her heart and soul. Within 2 weeks, she was enrolled in classes. The classes sustained her as she embarked on her own personal spiritual journey. As a practitioner, she began teaching Science of Mind courses here. Perhaps some of you were in those classes or the classes of some of these other women. She moved into ministerial school, and teaching was a large part of her ministry, first here, then at a center in Draper that she opened, and which ended up bringing Shemaine as her music director into Rick's life, and then into ours. Yay, Nicole. I knew that would get applause. Nicole also started an online education ministry, which 6 years ago led to her current position as education manager at the CSL home office, where she provides education support for CSL centers and students around the world. While Nicole is grateful for the solid foundation of Science of Mind principles she learned here, even more important to her is the love, encouragement, and support from folks in our community that kept her lifted in consciousness to live and work in her areas of passion and expertise. She still considers this her spiritual home. Reverend Myrna grew up here in Utah. She was a good member of the LDS Church before her life's journeys brought her to New Thought. First Unity, where her husband Therold continued for many years after she left. Then CSL, which Therold ultimately also joined. Like most of the women we've heard about this morning, Myrna found a home here, became a practitioner, and taught lots of our certificated classes, something we think she's going to do again soon. She started ministerial school, stopped, and then started again. When she graduated as a minister, she thought her life was going to be built around spreading the Science of Mind philosophy through small groups throughout the state of Utah. That didn't happen. Instead, she started a new church, the Layton Center for Spiritual Living, bringing Science of Mind to Davis County. They started small, first in a hotel, and then moving to their own small center. She taught classes, did Sunday services, special events, and workshops. Most of all, they loved and supported each other. It was wonderful, but it lasted only 3 years. Since then, Myrna has found other ways to be a minister, serving on a CSL committee, doing presentations at CSL International and the Parliament of World Religions, and she currently volunteers for both our center and the Satya Center in Ogden. Her latest plan is beginning a teaching chapter in Davis County, studying the science of mind philosophy in small groups in people's homes. We've had many conversations about the changing culture and alternatives to Sunday morning church. Myrna recognizes the deep need for people to get together, talk about important things, and share their lives, and is always looking for the best way to do that. Our upcoming book studies are one way. Above all, Myrna knows, as I'm guessing all these women do, that the word minister is a verb. Whatever she does, wherever she goes, Myrna ministers. Reverend Claire lives in Las Vegas, but her Science of Mind roots go deep into the deep soil of this center. She was ordained last September, but it was here that Claire began her calling. After attending just a few weeks, Claire moved into Foundations with Myrna. After that, one class led to another until only practitioner training was left. Claire was hard on herself, and she couldn't envision that she would be of help to anyone. But she loved taking classes, exploring new ideas, and being with others who were seeking something different, deeper. By the end of year 1, she knew she would be a practitioner. After licensing, she longed to be closer to family, so she moved to Las Vegas to help raise her 2 young grandchildren. She did find another center there to love. When Myrna raised the possibility of ministerial school, Claire again judged herself as too critical, lazy, and unorganized. But out of curiosity, she looked at the curriculum, and she was hooked. At an early retreat, she recognized that her whole life had been preparing her for this calling. She had been led to the right places where she met the right people who loved and supported and blessed her along the way. I'm guessing you've all had similar experiences. Claire recognizes that the journey of awakening never ends, though for her, as for many of us, when spirit nudges, as it just seems to insist on doing, her first response is doubt, fear, or reluctance, and leaves her saying, "Who, me? I can't do that." To which Spirit always responds, "You don't have to. I've got this. All I ask of you is that you take the next small step and then the next, and maybe once in a while, get still for a few minutes so you can hear the messages I'm sending you all the time." Wise counsel for all of us, right? And Reverend Lynn is our last but hardly least, who came to us 18 years ago and right away knew that she was home. She started into classes and quickly experienced demonstrations, which is what we call answered prayer. With each additional class, her realization of the power of her mind and word became more real, and her life greatly changed. Practitioner training was next, and as we've heard from many, licensing was not the initial goal, but became the obvious right thing to do. Ministerial training for Lynn didn't happen for another 4 years, until she had a powerful vision one morning in the shower that showed her lights illuminating the path in front of her, getting brighter and brighter, while the path behind her, her former life, grew dimmer and dimmer. After graduating from school, Lynn helped serve our center as a guide and regular speaker when we were without a senior minister. Many of us were bereft when, at her husband's urging, she moved to Texas to be near her son and grandchildren. She asked me to let you all know how much she misses being here with us. Lynn is just beginning a teaching chapter in her rural area where she can discuss our philosophy with a small group, forming deep relationships, and not having to deal with the administrative details of running a full church. This leaves her free to be with her family as she chooses. Lynn reflected on how very large the teaching of science of mind is, and yet so personal to each individual in how they choose to use it. It's equally as personal to each of these 8 women, whose ministries vary in size and focus, but who all have found their way to minister to the world as a result of the teachings they learned right here and the love and support that sustained them in our center. I'd say we have quite an expression of the divine feminine in our own living legacy. So this morning, as our practitioners are coming forward to offer up prayer on your behalf, I want to leave you all with a challenge from Reverend Claire. And here it is. I call on you to love your center and be grateful for it. Share your time, your money, your talents as freely and as generously as you can, so this center can flourish and continue to be a place of healing, a place of light, a place of learning, and a place where all who come are welcomed and can experience that wonderful feeling of coming home. And I encourage each of you in the days to come to reflect, as each of these women did, on what this center has meant to you and what the next steps are in your spiritual journey. What living legacy are you feeling called to create for yourself and for our center? Know that as you commit yourself to what is yours to do, we will support you in love. And so we move into our 5-step prayer that we call spiritual mind treatment. And so we breathe into the stillness that lives within, recognizing that there is one presence, one power, one divine mind out of which all that is came to be. A creative energy, a creative heart, a creative mind that wanted to express itself in so many unique and different ways that it created the entire universe. All that was, all that is, and all that evermore shall be arises out of this creative energy, this thing we call God. And we know today that each one of us are one with that divine creative mind, that we are co-creators with it, bringing into expression those things on which we focus and give our attention and our energy. And we know that prayer works. And so right now, if there is anything that you want support for this morning, I invite you to come forward to have a practitioner speak the truth for you as the rest of us sit with you in the silence. And so with a heart filled with gratitude for all who came forward to seek prayer, for all who prayed in their seats, my gratefulness is for the prayers that these are all already done in the mind of God. What an amazing thing that is. And so with my heart full of that joy and appreciation, I release all of these words into the law, which does the work, and let them be, as together we say, and so it is.